Hey everyone, welcome back to the Common Sense podcast by Easy Cons. Today's myth is one that sounds so logical you might have heard politicians say it. Government should save money like families do. Sounds sensible, right? If we had to live with our means, shouldn't governments do the same? You've heard this a million times, but it's wrong. Let's break it down. When you hear a politician say, we need to tighten our belts, just like any family sitting around their kitchen table, it feels relatable. Because in a household, when income falls, we cut back on Netflix, dining out, or vacations. If we spend more than we earn, we go into debt, and debt sounds bad. So when you hear about government deficits, it's easy to think that's irresponsible, they're just overspending. But here's the catch: governments aren't households, they don't operate under the same financial rules. Let's unpack why. When a family borrows money, it has to pay it back with income it earns, usually through jobs. When a government borrows money, it's borrowing in a currency that it creates. Let that sink in. If you or I print money, that's called counterfeiting. When a government does it, that's called monetary policy. Governments like the US, the UK, or even Singapore, they issue debt in their own currency. That means they can never run out of money in the same way a household can. Now, that doesn't mean governments can spend endlessly. Inflation and credibility matter, but the constraint isn't the same. A household has to earn money before spending it. A government can spend to create income in the economy. Here's where it gets interesting. When a government spends, say, on building roads, funding schools, or giving stimulus checks, that money doesn't disappear. It becomes someone else's income. The construction worker earns wages. The teacher gets paid. The business owner sells more goods. Government spending creates private sector wealth. And when the government runs a deficit, that is, it spends more than it collects in taxes. The flip side is the private sector runs a surplus. Think of it as two sides of the same coin. If the government tightens its belt too much, it's actually taking money out of the economy, making it harder for families and businesses to grow. So while the analogy of balancing your budget like a family sounds nice on TV, it's dangerously misleading in practice. Let's look at two real-world examples that prove this. After the global recession, many governments tried to cut back to reduce debt, especially in Europe. The result? Slower growth, higher unemployment, and a delayed recovery. In countries like Greece and Spain, austerity measures, cutting government spending during a downturn made things worse. It's like taking away a patient's medicine because you're afraid of the doctor's bill. On the other hand, the US and China took a different path. They spent a lot: stimulus packages, public works, and central bank support. And guess what? The economies recovered faster. When the pandemic hit, governments had two choices: cut spending to save money, or inject funds to keep the economy alive. Those who spend big, like the US, Singapore, and South Korea, managed to cushion job losses and prevent economic collapse. Yes, it increased national debt, but it also saved livelihoods. Because the role of a government isn't to save money, it's to stabilize the economy. Now, whenever we talk about government budgets, someone will say, but what about the debt? Won't our children have to pay for it? It's a fair question, but here's the nuance. Government debt isn't like a credit card bill. It's more like an IOU that circulates within the economy. Most government debt is actually held by its own citizens, pension funds, or central banks. So when the government pays interest on its debt, it's paying us. And as long as the economy grows faster than the debt, it's sustainable. Think about post-World War II America. Debt was sky high, over 100% of GDP. But the economy grew and that ratio naturally declined. The real question isn't how big is the debt, it's what are we getting in return. If borrowing funds education, infrastructure, innovation, or clean energy, those are investments that pay future dividends. Cutting that spending in the name of fiscal responsibility can actually make future generations poorer, not richer. Singapore is known for its fiscal prudence, but it's often misunderstood. Singapore doesn't run deficits the same way as other countries, but it still spends strategically through reserves and investment returns. During crises like COVID-19, the government drew on past savings because that's what reserves are for, to stabilize the economy, not to sit idle. That's responsible fiscal management, not penny pinching for the sake of it. Here's the takeaway. A government's job isn't to balance its budget every year, it's to balance the economy. When private demand is weak, government spending fills the gap. When the economy overheats, it can pull back or raise taxes. That's how you manage growth, inflation, and employment, not by pretending the nation's finances are like a family's checkbook. So, next time you hear someone say, governments should live within their means, ask, what do you mean by means? Because a government's true means lie in its capacity to produce, not just its balance sheet. That's it for today's episode of the Common Sense podcast by Easy Cons. If this episode made you rethink a common economic myth, share it with a friend. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep thinking like an economist.